Welcome to America, where if you're not white, then you're forever defined by what a few individuals do.
We are finding that after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the internment of Japanese Americans were not justified. Japanese Americans were treated as scum, and it was inhumane for the U.S. to isolate them. In source 5, it states that exclusion of those of Japanese origin was deemed necessary because of the presence of a number of disloyal members of the group.
What if the Japanese?
Most of whom we have not doubted are disloyal. Japanese Americans were suffering based on their race. It is unjust to take away their rights because that is something they cannot control. The U.S. failed as a country. The Japanese Americans were the U.S. property that they toyed with to take control over Japan from America.
What if the Japanese invade? What if the Japanese invades? A common question asked. As society, we are brainwashed. As a society, we are brainwashed. So maybe we assume that racism is making us perceive. Racism is making us unwilling to stop and think about how the Japanese were perceived. The internment of Japanese Americans was an excuse to get rid of most of them. Americans feared that yet another bombing will happen. Americans fear that yet another bombing will happen. Racial profiling allows us to perceive Japanese as or different. And the U.S. had an excuse to isolate many of the Japanese Americans, and we all know that racial prejudice played a big part during the war. And so for war controversy, War Relocation Authority, or OVMO, it says on February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt signed EO 9066, granting the Department of War brand powers.
America, where they automatically assume your disloyalty because you're a different race. Many Americans worry that the Japanese Americans would act as spies for the Japanese. Let's not forget that this isn't factual evidence. This is actually assumed because of fear. This thing called anti-Japanese paranoia increased to Americans, according to USHistory.com, and caused the U.S. to place over 127,000 Japanese Americans inside internment camps. From source 5, it says approximately 5,000 American citizens of Japanese ancestry refused to swear unqualified allegiance to the United States and to renounce allegiance to the Japanese Imperial, and several thousand evacuees requested deportation to Japan. Also, from OpenCongress.org, it stated, when Japanese first immigrated, they were accepted as citizens, considered a cheap labor. Basically, they were trying to make a living. They weren't meant to be living in areas where it could be potential danger. It is simply not their fault for being from Japanese ancestry, but who would want to be born on this godforsaken soil in any ways?
The internment and or isolation of Japanese Americans goes to show that civil rights meant nothing to the U.S. at that point. Civil rights, the rights of citizens to political and social freedom and equality, something that was almost foreign to Japanese Americans. Home of the free, says the U.S., but then they isolate one race from the others because they were simply suspects. Were they suspects, or were they the cards in your play of accusation? According to the quote by Margaret Shino, a survivor from an internment camp, social injustice greeted her at the door. When the FBI came to our house, that was a very traumatic experience. And they took anything written in Japanese, scrolls, and my mother's things that she bought from Japan. This goes to show that they didn't care whether or not you were part Japanese or not, or Japanese at all. If you were fit in the description, then you simply just was.
Good job. About time.
Yes, questions.
You said Japanese Americans were treated like some, but we gave them many things such as churches, schools, and other gaming things. It was humane to put them in the camp, but we have just protect our country. Why do you think it took so long for America to apologize? We fear because there were a lot of them.
Wait for them to answer. Why do you think it took so long for America to apologize?
We think it took too long for America to apologize because they wanted to swallow their pride and they wanted to seem like they were doing something to help everybody else except for like isolating and seeing things as racism. And we want to pass you out some cards so you can answer some questions. It's not questions out for us, but it's just questions that you can answer by yourself. And you can bring it up during the next one. But in reply to your question, they took too long to reply because they knew what they were doing was unconstitutional, racist, and hypocritical.
Make sure y'all read those.
You can bring it back to us when you're done.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's the point.
Can you read it out loud,
Yes,
please?
yes, please.
So the relocation of the Jap was A, stupid, B, racist, C, unconstitutional, and D, all of the above.
Do you have anything to say against that?
Yeah, my answer is none of the above.
Yes.
None of the above? Well, we
Give
have
us some
here of you guys. Why are you carrying guns then if that's not being racial? Why are you guys scared of those things?
Because the safety of a nation comes first.
Wait,
So,
I'm sorry about that, but aren't we people the same as you?
yes.
So then why are we being sent to these camps
For our
if we're
safety.
people?
for our
For your
safety.
safety.
Yeah.
Well,
So you say it's for your safety. Last time I checked, I thought Japanese Americans were actually citizens. More than over half of Japanese Americans were ancestral, and the 14th Amendment states that the 14th Amendment states. Hold on. Okay. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the judicial theory of all citizens in the United States and states wherein they reside. No states may or reinforce any law should abridge immunities of citizens in the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property. If over half of Japanese Americans were citizens, why did you deprive them of their property? You're basically going against your own amendment and your own laws.
If y'all were citizens, why did approximately 5,000 of y'all not want to say the Pledge of Allegiance?
can you answer our question? Can you answer our question? Why are you trying to? Oh, just proceed.
Okay. So you took the 5,000 people in. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
The internment camps were necessary for the protection of our nation because there were a lot of people that were immigrants who in some cases were loyal, but in other cases weren't very sure. Okay, well, they were very able to have access to many targets because they lived so close to them. Also, so many of the immigrants still had worship to the Shinto god, which is a structure of connection to the Japanese. So internment camps weren't made to imprison immigrants, but to protect them from the attacks going on in their homes and areas and keeping them from dying.
To continue on what Deanna said, the internment camps were very important because on February 1942, a man tried to burn down his house and leave it behind. He was going insane because he had to leave his house. What if he had a simple law that he did not like? Would he try to burn down a federal building, or worse, calling help from Japan to take over?
to continue from what Asia said, internment camps were important because they help us to keep an eye on the Japanese. We never took away their daily routines because we let them make schools. They were fed proper. They also made churches. So even though they couldn't walk freely, we still try to make it freely like home. We still try to make it feel like home.
Okay, so war is a time of grief and betrayal. So we wanted to make sure that we were safe. We didn't do it because of race or anything. We just did it for our safety. It was the best thing we could think of.
Are you done with your opening statement?
I guess so.
Yes.
Your questions?
I like to go first. Asia, in your opening statement, you said something about a man who went crazy. Could you repeat that again?
He was going insane because he had to leave his house.
Okay. Where's your evidence for that?
It's actually in a YouTube video. It's called Japanese Americans During World War II. And in February 19th, 1942, a man was told to leave his home, so he tried to burn it down because he didn't want to leave it behind. And yeah, his wife told him not to do it because they were like civil, but he was still going insane. So why would we let somebody like that walk around if they hear something they don't like? What you gonna do? Burn down something?
Okay. Would you if you had a choice to go to an internment camp and see what a real internment camp of Japanese citizens looked like, you would see filth all over the place. People with dirty bodies, hardly any food at all, tight barracks, hardly any place to sleep. Would you consider that fair?
Well, there was a lot of you guys over here, so what we're gonna picture?
Yeah, but hold on. And President Roosevelt, when Japanese were sent to internment camps, they said it'd be nicely furnished and they'd be living a comfy lifestyle until the war was over to prove that their allegiance to the United States. How is any of this picture a comfy lifestyle? Yeah.
I can't see.
Couldn't let them pass that around.
Because they're tightly packed together as if they were wild hogs. Can you pass this?
I mean, how else would we get them to go there?
So you're basically lying.
Saying that you don't care about them.
I mean, we were.
Well, what do you want us to throw you in the desert and just let you starve?
That's what you basically
Well,
did.
we were.
Well, we fed you. It might have not been enough, but it was a lot of you guys, so.
We were lying for our safety.
So your safety is more important than Japanese Americans. Is that what you're saying?
At this point in time, yes.
How is it at that point in time when Japanese Americans were actually legal citizens with their legal papers?
We didn't know who was who, and we couldn't trust anybody. It was just for our safety.
What about the people whose ancestry were long, like 3 generations? What about them?
Well, they were still. We just didn't know, so we didn't know who was who, so we tried to protect ourselves. And yeah.
So you're basically being racist.
Yes.
Not really.
No, that wasn't the time.
Okay.
Let me look at that picture.
If you must speak about humanity, we can talk about the Japanese Americans communal living. According to livestream.com, proper medical care was rarely accessible, and so numerous people died or suffered greatly because their lack of treatment. According to Executive Order 9066, President Roosevelt promised Japanese Americans furnishing of medical aid and hospitalization, which was the truth.